Hello, everyone. Here we are, episode 26, Why Christians Should Keep the Law. And currently, we are looking at what I would call one of the most destructive men in the history of Christianity. A man who was absolutely led by Satan himself. And that is Marcion of Sinope, a man of Pontus, a man who was excommunicated in the early 2nd century, who was deemed completely heretical for corrupting the true gospel. Well, we're going to continue to peel back some layers here just so we can get into the mind and the doctrine of Marcion through Tertullian's commentary. And so Tertullian goes on and he says this: the separation of law and gospel, listen to this, is the primary and principal exploit of Marcion. This was agenda number one, above all else, was to separate the law and the gospel. Now, I want you to consider something. This is the number one principal exploit of the devil. There's no question about it. He wants the brainwashing to be so effective that when you hear the term law, all you think is curse. When you hear the term law, you think oppression. When you hear the term law, your immediate reaction is to run the other way. Whereas scripturally speaking, when we hear the term law, we should be thinking instruction. When we hear the term law, we should be thinking wisdom, understanding. We should be thinking correction. We should be thinking truth. We should be thinking holiness. This is what we should be thinking, and yet the devil has flipped this conversation upside down, and he has done it in a very terrifying way through Marcion. Now, Tertullian goes on and says this: for such are Marcion's antitheses or contrary oppositions, which are designed to show the conflict and disagreement of the gospel and the law, so that they may argue further for a diversity of gods. And I want you to take that in, that the weight of that statement. It's hard to calculate, because what Tertullian just laid out for us, and he did so magnificently, is that by Marcion being able to divide, to create this opposition between law and gospel, he was able to accomplish the unthinkable. What was ordinarily completely unthinkable, Marcion accomplished. In other words, he was now able, because he made that separation, now he was able to go and argue for a different God. I'm going to say something. This is so important that we appreciate this. If you can do what Marcion did, if Satan can come into a church, into a community, and convince that community of the opposition of the law in the gospel, and that there is no relationship, and that they're the antithesis to one another, listen to me, the sky is the limit. He will be able to ultimately convince them of anything he wants. Anything he wants. And in that context, what you would see is people who are in same-sex relationships standing behind a pulpit. You would see preachers promoting abortion. You would see divorce rates in a church that are off the charts. You would see men in the church, 70% of your community, wallowing in pornography, and yet coming back to church the next week, and watching porn the whole week, and yet coming back to the church next week. If you can separate the law from the gospel, this is the setting that you will find. And they will absolutely, certainly go off and start believing unthinkable doctrines, unimaginable things that you'd be like, how could you even get there? The only way you could argue for a diversity of gods is if you separate the law and the gospel. How scary is this? Now, Tertullian goes on, he says, therefore, as it is precisely this separation of law and gospel which has suggested a God of the gospel other than and in opposition to the God of the law. Now, I just want to stop there. let's just so that I want to make sure that we're clear on something. The God of the law is the same God of the gospel. He's one and the same. You read John, 1 John, a passage we covered, that, okay, the law came through Moses, but grace and truth, grace and law came through Jesus Christ. I mean, it is one and the same. So he says, other than and in opposition to the God of the law, it is evident that before that separation was made, that God was still unknown, who has just come into notice in consequence of the argument for separation. And so he was not revealed by Christ, who came before the separation, but was invented by Marcion. And again, Tertullian lays this out, that the fruit of this separation of the law and the gospel, the fruit of that was this insane argument that there is two different gods, the God of the gospel and the God of the law. Now, he goes on, Marcion, who set up the separation in opposition to that peace between gospel and law, which previously, from the appearance of Christ until the impudence of Marcion, had been kept unimpaired. Now take that in. Here you have Tertullian, also from the 2nd century, saying, prior to Marcion, the harmony, the peace and shalom between law and gospel was firmly intact. It wasn't until Marcion came on the scene where that was broken, where now all of a sudden the gospel and the law go to war, where they are diametrically opposed, or they're presented as they're diametrically opposed. And this is the work of the devil. This is what he does. Now he goes on and says, and unshaken by virtue of that reasoning, which refused to contemplate any other God of the law and the gospel than that creator, against whom after such a long time, by a man of Pontus, separation has been let loose. Literally, the law and the gospel are like this, but after Satan's work through Marcion, it was destroyed. That separation has been let loose. I hope to see you in the next episode. The Lord bless you and keep you.